Guest speaker, Lieutenant General Rick Hack, served 33 years in the U.S. Army, commanding at every rank from lieutenant to general officer. Lieutenant Hack graduated with a BA in History, Virginia Military Institute, and earned an MBA, Florida Technical Institute. He supports local patriotic organizations with speeches and lectures. From 2014 to present, he is particularly honored to write next of kin 3-star letters for each funeral service that the local VFW conducts. These letters are numbering now over 400 and are read at the gravesite and given to the family. Lieutenant General Hack is married 49 years to his wife, Roseanne. I would like to introduce General Hack. Thank you, sir. Thank you for being here.
Thanks a lot for having me, John and Troy. It is my honor to address the Honor Flight Club. And thanks for everything you all do for our veterans. Can you all hear me in the back? Okay. A little, okay. Just a show of hands, how many are veterans? Spouses of veterans? Wow, that's great. I'd like to thank you all for your services. Well, this is going to be a talk about the Army. I'm a third-generation soldier, and so I thought it'd be particularly good if I told you a little bit about myself and my family so that you can have my perspective on the Army. In the lower left-hand corner of this slide is my grandfather. He served during World War I as a cook. I never saw him cook. My father, in the lower right-hand corner, joined the Army as a private during World War II, was sent to the Pacific Theater, came back for Officer Candidate School, became a second lieutenant of armor, and then was shipped to the European theater where he fought in some of the largest tank battles of World War II. Wounded 3 times, Silver Star recipient, and was in the lead company that liberated Stalag 7 Alpha, the largest POW camp in Germany. He got out after World War II, came in during the Korean War, stayed in, went to Vietnam, and retired in 1974 as a full colonel, from private to full colonel. In the center is my son and I in Iraq in 2005. My son is a proud 2003 graduate of the United States Military Academy. He was branched second lieutenant of infantry, commanded an infantry platoon in combat in Iraq for 13 months. I entered the Virginia Military Institute in 1968. I was commissioned a second lieutenant of the Ordnance Corps. In May of 1972, I came on active duty in 6th August 1972 at 16:59 hours. Was going to stay in for 3 months, which extended into 33 years. I retired at the end of 2005. These are the patches I wore during my time in service. These 17 patches represent 31 moves that my wife and I made. In fact, my son, who is depicted on the previous slide, his first 10 years of schooling, he went to 10 different schools. Every person's time in service is unique in some way. I'd like to tell you about 4 things that are unique about my service. The first may amaze some of you. I was the only 3- or 4-star general in the Army that was never stationed in the Pentagon. There are many fine folks who served in the Pentagon. I was not one of them. The second thing is, I told you I was commissioned as an ordnance officer. I was one of only 2 logisticians in the history of the Army to be an assistant division commander of an infantry division. Infantry division is about 20,000 soldiers. There's a 2-star in command, and he has 2 assistant division commanders. I was one of those. 4th Infantry Division, Iron Horse. Third thing, U.S. Code, 10 U.S. Code, the law passed by Congress requires a general officer to be joint qualified. I rubbed shoulders with a lot of Marines and airmen and women and Navy, but I was never joint qualified. They had to produce a special waiver to let me become a brigadier general. And then finally, the thing I'm most proud about is in 1998, the Sergeant Major of the Army, the top enlisted soldier in our force, appointed me as an honorary non-commissioned officer, honorary NCO with the grade of Sergeant First Class E7. And for the last 7 years of my time in the service, I wore my stars on one side of my collar and my Sergeant First Class on the other. So I'm often asked, why do we need a ground force? Why do we need the Marines? Why do we need the Army? T.R. Fehrenbach, a noted American historian and writer, said it better than anyone. I mean, we have a lot of really great standoff weapons, and with the drone technology now, you'd think, hey, why do we need a ground force? Well, you can pulverize it, but if you want to capture it, if you want to defend it, if you want to keep it for civilization, you got to do it the old-fashioned way with boots in the mud. Now, a little bit about the Army. The Army today is about 1 million strong. That's about 485,000 in the active force, about 330,000 in the National Guard, populating every state in the Union, and another 188,000 in the reserves. Backing up this 1 million soldier force is about 197,000 Department of the Army civilians. They provide the continuity and the bureaucratic strength that an organization as large as the Army requires. Backing up the 197,000 Department of the Army civilians is probably 2 or 3 times that amount of contractors. And so it's a very large force. Across the armed forces today, we have about 1.3 million troopers in uniform on the active duty side. With attrition, death, people getting out. Across all services, we need to recruit every year about 150,000 folks, which is a huge amount, particularly when you consider that between 70 and 79% of the target demographics, 17 to 24-year-olds, are ineligible to serve in our armed forces today for 4 reasons: obesity, other medical issues, criminal background, and believe it or not, in America, lack of high school diploma. And so there's great competition among the services to in fact attract the populations we need to attract. We have now 187,000 soldiers deployed or forward deployed, meaning they live in Germany or somewhere other than the United States. And given the numbers I just told you, any argument about whether or not females are required in the armed services, that argument is dead and has been dead for a long time. We cannot fulfill our responsibilities to America unless we have a balanced force that includes females. In 2005, when I retired, the Army had 320,000 soldiers deployed or forward deployed in about 120 countries around the world. And in Iraq and Afghanistan, our convoys were being hit with rocket-propelled grenades, mines, and improvised explosive devices. I'll call them IEDs. I think you're all familiar with that. And our base camps and logistics support areas were routinely rocketed and mortared. So this is my favorite slide. I'm going to spend a little time with this. When I registered for the draft in 1968, I think probably many of you all, that was your target date as well. The average age of a trooper was 22 years old. Today, we're a much more mature force, about 6 years more mature. 1 out of 5 soldiers in 1968 did not have a high school degree or a diploma. Now it's virtually impossible to get in without a high school diploma or equivalent. You can see that in 68 we had very few female, and now we're almost at 20%. I can tell you the #1 soldier that ever worked for me, and I had thousands work for me, was a female soldier that ended up as a 3-star general. In 1968, over half the Army were draftees. Now we're 100% volunteer. One that's really commanders have to pay attention to is back in 68, virtually you had to be a non-commissioned officer or to be married and have a family. There were exceptions, but generally, now over half the enlisted force is married, and that means that commanders have to spend energy making sure that troops, lower enlisted troops, have safe place to live, safe place to shop, that the commissary and BX or PX are done correctly, that the school system is appropriate. We have a saying in the Army: you enlist soldiers, you re-enlist families. And I believe that to be true. In 1968, the base pay of a Sergeant E5 was $279. That same sergeant today, $3,600 a month. The government in 1968, with Vietnam going on, indemnified soldiers with a life insurance policy worth $10,000. That today a soldier is indemnified with a life insurance policy of $500,000. And finally, the last 2 points I'll make. When the first sergeant in 1968 said, "We're going on a little hike in the woods, we're gonna ruck it up," soldiers put on about 35 pounds of equipment, the average soldier. And that equipment cost about $2,000. Today, when the first sergeant says, "Hey, we're going on a little hike in the woods, ruck it up," the average soldier is wearing or carrying 75 pounds of stuff, and that stuff cost about 10 times what it did in '68. And the last thing I'll talk about is survival rate. '68 was a really tough year in Vietnam. Overall in the Vietnam War, it was survival rate of those wounded was probably closer to 75%. But today, it's 91%, and it has been through the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. And the reason for that is three areas: medical operations, treatment, and evacuation. In medical operations, the medical leadership has pushed field hospitals far forward in the battle space to get it as close to the wounded as possible. And first line medical capability. In terms of treatment, two things stand out, because what you're trying to do is stop blood loss. Anticoagulant bandages, which have been a great boon, and the proper and timely use of tourniquets. And then finally, evacuation, medical, the rotary wing started in Korea, the Korean War. It cut its teeth in Vietnam, and in Afghanistan and Iraq. It really makes a difference. We talk about the golden hour. How much time I got left?
Whatever you need.
Well, I'll go through some of this pretty quick. When I was a second lieutenant, and not a very good second lieutenant, I might add, this was the type of equipment we had. And many of you who are vets probably had the same equipment. It was as old as I was, with the exception of the Cobra and the Huey. I mean, the M48 Patton tank was 1951 it came into force. During the Reagan buildup of the armed forces, the Army got the Big Five, we call it. Now, I was a mechanized soldier. I was not a straight leg infantry. We rode. The M1 tank was the centerpiece of the new equipment that we got in the Army. That's a 68-ton killer. And we don't talk about miles per gallon with that thing. We talk about gallons per mile. The M2 Bradley, reports from Ukraine is the Russians fear that more than any other thing that we've provided them, with the exception of the Stinger and a couple of others. The Patriot missile system is in the news all the time. The Israelis have our system and use it in conjunction with their Iron Dome. We've provided the same to Ukraine. This is $1 billion system, $1 billion system. And so a mechanized force, mechanized division, consumes in the offense 475,000 gallons of fuel every day. Let me say that again, 475,000 gallons of fuel every day. And so when you think about just the logistics of moving that much around the battlefield so that they can be fueled, it's really something. This is actual footage in Iraq of a truck that wouldn't stop. The passenger and driver fled, and they weren't sure if there was anything in it or not, a truck bomb, so they had the M1 do this. And that's the end of that. The last few years I was on active duty, we were putting armor on thin-skinned vehicles to protect our troops, and we had two new families of vehicles, MRAPs and Strykers. The MRAP was specifically made to defeat or to help protect our soldiers against IEDs and landmines. This is actual footage from 2016. That's an Afghani soldier in an MRAP provided by the U.S. government. He is escorting a convoy. People do not realize how powerful the mines and IEDs are. I'll show it again in slow motion. Our troopers of all branches, think how brave they are to go outside the wire, outside the base camp, and face something like this. They're as good as any generation of soldiers that we had. Okay, just going to talk quickly about the Stinger and the Javelin. Two weapon systems, shoulder fired, that we've provided tens of thousands of these to Ukraine. One is an aircraft killer, and the other is a tank killer. And they take just a few hours to learn how to use. This is a Ukraine soldier shooting down Russian helicopters. I'm telling you, this is 1980s technology, and I just pray that all the Stingers ended up in the hands of the right people. Javelins are just as deadly to track vehicles. Once again, it takes hours to learn. Both of them are fire and forget weaponry, which means you acquire the target, you pull the trigger, and you walk away or run away. This is a Ukraine soldier engaging a Russian tank. Now you're going to see some secondary explosions. That's because in Russian tanks, there's no firewall, no protection. They keep their ammunition forward near the breach. And so what happens is you see the ammunition popping off. I am going to quit there and just say what I know all of you know, and that is freedom really isn't free. Many of you helped pay for the freedoms others enjoy, and I thank you all. I'm open to any questions.